Events and Programs Manager here at the NCC. And I'd like to welcome you all to our Tech Coach on Professional Communication. And I am pleased to introduce our speaker today, Allie Feiner, who is the VP of Global Technology and Operations at AllianceBernstein. So Allie, thank you for being here, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining. So as Haley mentioned, my name is Allie Feiner. I'm a VP here at AllianceBernstein. And of the many hats I wear, one of them that I work on is communication with our executive team. So this is a very fun topic for me. In fact, we just got done with our last global town hall of the year. So today going to speak a little bit about professional communication, whether that's email, meeting etiquette, other forms. I'd love to make this highly interactive. We've changed the Zoom so that you all can speak. So feel free to raise your hand, interrupt me. Would love to hear your feedback, cater this to answer your questions as needed. Before we dive in, for those of you who aren't familiar, AllianceBernstein is an asset manager. We moved our headquarters down here to Nashville about 6 or 7 years ago at this point. And while we are known for our work in financial services, about a third of our organization globally does sit in technology and operations. So we do a lot with the Nashville Technology Council and are really excited to be joining again for the Tech Coach series. So wanted to break today's session into 3 parts. So we'll start with active listening, which is really important, whether that's in a meeting, talking one-on-one, working with your team or with your manager, go into a meeting etiquette, and then get into a little bit more of a formal business writing, leaving time for questions and answers at the end. But also, please, like I said, feel free to interrupt me. Happy to answer your questions as we go. So active listening. We talk about this a lot, right? And we've got so many distractions going on around us. Here at AB, we sit on this wide open floor plan. There's people talking and in meetings. So what is active listening? And more importantly, why is it important? So when we think of active listening, it's a set of techniques that allow you to give full concentration when someone is speaking. But it is not enough just to listen actively. You want to portray that you're listening actively so that the people that you're in a meeting with feel like you are paying attention and understand. So when you're listening actively, you're listening to gather the information. It helps you with communication. It helps you to better understand and form an opinion and give your best informed response. So at your future job or your current job, or even in any situation in your relationships, when you're speaking with your family or your friends at home, you'll see there's really a lot of examples of good listeners and bad active listeners. And I think it's important always to be a good one. It builds trust, and you're being listened to. That feeling when you're having a conversation, you feel heard, you feel seen, it improves the strength of that relationship. You want to divulge more information, you want to continue working together, and it helps the person you're speaking to understand what is said. So it helps give clear instructions, and it really helps to work as a team in any setting. So when you're actively listening, you're showing that you care. It helps the person that you're speaking with feel comfortable sharing. And overall, it improves the streamline of communication in both directions. So how do you actively listen? It's one thing to just say, yeah, I'm listening. How many of you have been in a conversation with someone? They say, yeah, I heard you, I'm listening, right? You're like, I don't know. It didn't feel like that. So what are some of those things that we do? A lot of it is really our body language. And so when I'm thinking about active listening, you're making good eye contact, right? And sometimes nodding, or acknowledging different points. And it's a fine line between nodding and, making an agreeable noise versus interrupting, which sometimes you find people are talking to respond versus talking to listen. And I think that crosses into maybe what not to do. Your body posture, right? Are you leaning in? Are you really interested in what somebody is saying to you? Are you absorbing it? Are you thinking about it? You don't have to make eye contact the whole time. That can be super weird, or uncomfortable, right? Be natural. You're having a conversation. Um, and watch their facial expressions as well, because their body language is communicating just as much as yours. And then the way that you respond in the kind of thoughtful questions that you ask. And if you don't understand, that's okay as well. You may ask a clarifying question, or dig a little bit deeper, right? Why did you decide to do it that way? It doesn't have to be a challenge. It's to help me understand why you chose this, or, what is the result of that? Or what do you think the outcome will be? We talk a lot about what not to do as well. We've all got these. These are our best and our worst friends. And there's nothing worse than talking to somebody who is thumbing on their phone. I think that that is a huge deterrent of wanting to communicate and to open up. You know, we talk about good posture, but if I'm slouching and not paying attention and looking out the window, seeing what's going on in downtown Nashville, it's not going to make anybody really want to communicate or share with me either. Again, we talked about those facial expressions and details, and really listening and asking good questions, but careful not to interrupt. And when you ask clarifying questions, it's great to say like, wow, I hear that you said this, but was just curious what your thought process was. But if you just say, huh, what were you talking about? You're going to shut somebody down immediately. So important to think about how you phrase things, what your tone is, all of those nonverbal details, that really help to promote active listening. So active listening is a big part of meeting etiquette, as well as your body language, but going to talk about just a few other things that are important, as you're going into meetings, and whether that's a one-on-one with a teammate or your manager, or somebody that you may supervise, or a big meeting where you're in a room with a large group of people. I think the important thing to remember is that you never know who's watching or observing your behavior. Um, and that reflects a lot on you, not just in what you say, but how you behave. So, some very basic meeting etiquette definitions are, always showing up on time. We all have instances where we're running from meeting to meeting to meeting. I myself am guilty of this. But manage expectations. Hey, I'm running a few minutes late. I'm so sorry. I will be there shortly. Or if you set a meeting, you have to show up on time. Everybody's time is valuable. And in today's world where we're so booked back to back, one delay snowballs into another, and you've thrown off somebody's very busy day. And it just reflects a disrespect. Again, we go back to that kind of etiquette of not interrupting, treating people with respect. And this is a big one that I've learned throughout my career. In my work, I have worked with people from store employees and associates up through the C-suite. And you'll learn that everybody has a really valuable opinion to share, an observation, and has an influence over how things are run. One thing I pay very important attention to, and for those of you who are in the early phases of seeking out new roles or careers, I find that I pay attention to how people treat our recruiters, our concierge team that greets them at the front desk. It's very indicative how you treat people, at each and every level, how you're going to perform in your role, and how you're going to be a colleague or a coworker that I'm going to want to sit next to and collaborate with and be in the foxhole with every day. And just in general, it's kind to treat people with respect. Um, that final point on speaking loudly and confidently is a balance. But you want to come in and you want to portray that you have the confidence in your abilities, balanced with a humility. You want to display your skills, but also remember that you're surrounded by people who are also hardworking and smart and working right alongside with you. So difficult situations will arise. For those of you on the line, before I jump in, curious if anybody's had a difficult situation pop up, maybe how they've handled it, or if they want to share, or if they'd like advice on how to handle it. Not everyone at once, please.
I've definitely noticed in certain meetings having people looking like they want to speak up but aren't confident enough to. And I haven't always known whether it's, right to ask them to speak up or just kind of let them do what they're more comfortable with.
Yeah, that's a great, great example. I find some people feel really bold about speaking up, others not so much, and oftentimes those are the people with really great ideas. Uh, there's a lot of ways to contribute in a meeting. I think sometimes you can either, depending on how comfortable you feel, you can ask them directly. Or I might say, that's a really interesting question. I was just working on a project like that with my colleague Paul, and he did a really great job. Paul, can you share a little bit more about that? Or, maybe Mary could talk a little bit about that project we worked on together. So I'll kind of start an anecdote and pass off the credit. And that forces them a little bit to discuss it, or perhaps they're more comfortable talking about it outside the meeting. Some people are horribly shy and don't wish to kind of step up in that. And so I may mention it, and then send a follow-up meeting that said, hey, boss, uh, really appreciated your inquiry about, if somebody's worked on this type of thing. Just wanted to share, I had experience working with Chris on, this type of project. I think he'd be a really valuable resource, and like copy Chris or whomever it is in and get the conversation started. So you can be a really strong advocate. Um, and that actually helps you stand out as well. And you want to promote other people. Trust me, there is more than enough work to go around. Thank you for the question. Was there another person I think was going to chime in? All right. Well, please feel free to jump in. So the first point there about side conversations, we've all been in meetings where people are chit-chatting on the side. It can be very distracting. It's going to happen. They're having side conversations, they're shooting off emails, they're not paying attention. First of all, just because somebody else is doing it does not mean that it's okay for you to be doing it. I know it feels like it sets the tone, but you never know, one, what's going on. There could be a big fire drill going on in their world and they're dealing with it. They could be setting a really poor example that you don't want to follow. Depending on your position, you can kind of inquire about it. You can choose to ignore it if that's more appropriate. Or you can very politely ask them to stop. It can be extremely distracting. If you're leading the meeting, I will typically address it head on and ask them if they'd like to share with the class. um, the middle point there is about people being overly argumentative. And I think that this happens more often than not. And it's important to understand how to diffuse it. The last thing that you want to do when somebody is being argumentative is argue back. So in meetings, we bring our professional self, we bring our professional viewpoints, but I go back to what I said earlier, is that we also have to bring humility. So there's going to be a whole bunch of different viewpoints, and quite often we're wrong. And that's why we pivot fast. That's why we have a room full of really smart people with great ideas. So if somebody's really, really stuck on something, then you bring your point, and if they won't drop it, then maybe it's time to address it offline or to just drop the conversation. There's no need to escalate something in a big group of people. There's nothing to be gained from that. I'll typically ask to take it offline and address it with them, or we'll share my point of view and move on. You can de-escalate it, then that's the win. If they go more and more and more intense, then you just stay very calm and take it down as best you can. The last thing you want to do is react. Any other questions or situations come to mind here? Because I know this can be a particularly difficult or nerve-wracking bit. If you think of them too, we can talk about them later in the session. So on a lighter note, asking questions. So I'm a huge, huge proponent of asking questions. And the active listening that we talked about earlier will come in extremely handy in this instance, where if you've actively listened, excuse me, you'll have really good content to bring in. Everybody appreciates when you ask a question that's based in what they've discussed or something they've said, or even something they've said in the past. And it's important to be really thoughtful. It shows that you are thinking. It shows that you understand. What you don't want to do is ask a question just to ask a question. I do see that sometimes, and we do want to make sure that we're really using everybody's time in the wisest way. I do like the last tip here, where you want to, if you think of a question, write it down. I often get really excited. I hear something, I want to say it. I'll write down the thought, I'll write down the question. If there's not time in the meeting, go back and maybe write that follow-up note, or I'll make a note to it, or I'll have a follow-up discussion with somebody, because great things can be spawned out of it. It doesn't have to take place right then and there. And you can always request a follow-up meeting to discuss that as well. So the last topic that I'd like to broach in this webinar is business writing. Before we dive right into that, writing is a particularly important topic because everything you write is there and there's a historical artifact, and you want to be really careful how you choose your words, because there is no tone in the written word. And you don't want to confuse people with what you're saying. You want to be very clear, concise, and intentional about how you are writing things, what you're committing to, and knowing that that is, again, a written artifact that can be brought back up. So what is good business writing? It's written communication used in the workplace, and there's tons of different kinds. We'll go over a couple of basic types, but it's infinite these days. Business writing should include instant messages, Slack, whatever the technology that your workplace uses. Text messages are included in that if it is something that is approved by your firm. And it just should be very quick, clear, efficient. I know sometimes people want to put in all the details, but if you think about the day and the life of a typical executive or somebody that you work with, they want facts and they want them fast. And how much time do they really want to spend reading it? I worked for somebody earlier in my career, and she said, I want a tweet of the information, and that is all I'm going to read. And it really forced me to think about choosing my words carefully when I was communicating with her, because that was about all I could get out on some pretty important updates. When you think about things like your elevator pitch, and it's we talk about it, but truly sometimes all you have is an elevator ride to catch somebody up on what's going on. Just because you have the time to write a very long email or a long communication doesn't mean that it's necessary or effective.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. You want to
What
elaborate on
about
that?
what about using aids to write? Here I am very tied to my Grammarly account, and
Hmm.
we use it a lot. I use it personally a lot to write emails or even writing. I have a text that I write. I editing the textbook right now and going through. And with the advent of AI, writing has become, in the past, we used to have people that used to keep email from people that send emails that were perfectly written, like, man, I wish I could write with this person, you know.
Yeah.
But now with the advent of AI, when I communicate with my students, I just use AI and Grammarly and come out with something really quickly. What it normally will take me like 20 minutes to writing, 2 minutes it's ready.
Yeah.
So mhm.
Yeah, I think that it's a really interesting point. I mean, the thing to know with using AI with anything really is it's a great starting point, but it's not the end point. Um, and all of these tips still apply where you want to make sure that the length is appropriate, the tone as best as your ability to do within, written communication is appropriate. The content, the messaging. AI will give you a first pass at it, but it's still just a first pass. You want to make sure the messaging is correct, the nuances as it relates to your business, your client, your market, your, fill in the blank are accurate. It's the same thing we're seeing in the technology space. Like yes, anybody can go in and say, write me a line of code in XYZ. But if you don't know what you are looking for, you don't know if that code is correct. You don't know how to debug it. You don't know if it's applicable. And there's no reason not to use any of these as a starting point, but you still have to understand what the basic rules and structure are.
And of course, you target your message to your audience. So the first step is knowing your audience, know who you're gonna write to. Mhm.
Yes, yes. No, I completely agree with you. And knowing, yes, just not just the audience, but also how they like to receive information, which is a bit out of scope of what we're talking about today. But as you build deeper relationships with your coworkers and your clients, et cetera, your colleagues, people like to digest information in different ways, and you have to really cater it to them to be most impactful. So yes, it's a very good point. But yes, thank you. Great discussion point, and happy to kind of go down that path a little bit more at the end. But as we think about just very basic, business communication formats, the ones you're going to see the most, emails. I bet we all get countless numbers of those on a daily basis. Memos, I think we still see a fair amount of memos, some going out via email, and then reports, depending on what type of field you end up in. We still see a fair amount of reports, white papers, eminence, things like that. I think with email, sometimes we forget the formality. They can be very quick and easy, but do need to be clear. And I think when you're starting a new job, it's important to see kind of the cadence of how they're sent, how people address each other. I still think it's kind of funny when we get a new class of interns or associates, and I get, "Dear Miss Feiner," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, who is that?" But it's nice, it's respectful, and it's okay to ask, how do people address each other in a new workplace? Are titles important? You know, scheduling. I mean, I know I personally live and die by my Outlook calendar, as I mentioned before. But what is the customary practice where you are or going to be working? Do people send an email to schedule? Do they go right into Outlook or whichever calendar app they're using and schedule it? What kind of information do they like to include in the subject line? I mean, all of these things are really important business communication norms that will help. When it comes to emails or other forms of communication like that, and even just meeting invites, I always say, help me help you. The more information you provide me up front, and so I'm walking in equipped, the faster I can help you or make a decision, or give you an informed opinion. Because quite often, as you're dealing with people that have, you know, bigger roles or are managing you or managing multiple teams, they're required to pivot. So they're going to spend 30 minutes on one topic and then walk into another room and have to think about something completely different. And it can be really challenging to change your mindset like that. So the more information that you provide and the more context, the more they can shift quickly and help you. So you're arming people with information. Moving on to a memo, I think you're seeing a little bit less of these now, but it is a bit more formal and structured for internal company communication. You'll probably, again, sometimes see these over email, whether it's as an attachment or as a longer formal email, but org changes, announcements, different year-end processes you'll probably see right around now. And then the reports, again, more external. You may see these published as you're looking at things online. They may even have a title page. Table of contents might get quite long, but as you're looking at different organizations, or perhaps you're in the job seeking phase, I would look at different reports that are published on the organization, what they're working on, what their priorities are. That can be a really great way for you to learn about the company. And if you're on the other side of writing them, again, remember that people will be reading them for research purposes, and all of that information is public. So this is, again, pretty basic. What is the importance of strong business writing? You want to be clear and concise and avoid misunderstandings. In any facet of business, you want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. You're being clear about what you're going to deliver, as well as what the expectations are, and make sure that everybody is really aligned in their work process and what's going to be delivered in deadlines. And overall, it just avoids conflict, mistake, and leads to high performance. So some best practices, we've touched on a lot of these, but really want to drive it home. And this is best practices for business writing, but I would say for all of the communication and etiquette things we've discussed. Writing briefly but clearly, I cannot emphasize that enough. I'm going to use those short sentences. Avoid some jargon. I know we all love a good colloquialism, jargon, technical term, but things that words that we use every day, other people may not. And it really varies what our firm might call something versus another firm. It's okay to use a very latent term. It avoids misunderstandings. Professional tone, I think we've talked about quite a bit. It's very important in verbal and written communication. Language or value diminishing language, and I have a bit more on filler language in a minute, but I just wanted to, or that's okay, or I think. You don't think you know. This is my recommendation. It doesn't have to be correct, but I just is, just don't use just. It's not going to add any value. Don't undermine yourself or your recommendation. There's always room for improvement. There's always room for feedback, but you don't need to set yourself up for anything less than a confident recommendation. Next one is one of my favorites, active voice versus passive voice. I was a little bit of a grammar nerd in school, but it just, again, adds to that clear and concisity. And then finally, proofread and edit. I can't tell you how many resumes I get or emails with just really basic mistakes. And it's not so much the mistake as what it signals. It signals that you did not take time to proofread something important. Everybody makes mistakes, but you really just want to, not just, now I caught myself doing it. You want to make sure that what you're sending is representative of the great work that you do. Negative impact, I'm not going to go through this. We've talked about it, just unprofessional, not a good use of anyone's time. Don't need to harp on this because we're not going to do it. And finally, filler language. And this, I'm sure I've used plenty of it, but was, again, drilled into me by an early mentor. She called me up and said, if you say like one more time, and to this day, every time I speak with her, when we hang up, she says, watch the likes. But again, some phrases just don't add value and they diminish your intelligence, like just like, and it's really hard and you want to practice it. And in your written communication, it's quite easy to remove. In your verbal communication, just keep practicing an appropriate use of just, by the way. And then Grammarly was mentioned before, AI. It's okay to use tools like that to edit or to start. But again, make sure that you're applying a critical lens. So I think that is all of the prepared remarks that I had, but would love to make this a bit of an interactive session for the time remaining. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other if anybody is brave enough to come on video. And yeah, would love to answer any questions that you may have with the remaining time.
Hi, Allie. I'm Ryan. Thank you for your tips there. I had a question, or do you have any
Sure.
advice on emails where folks may not answer some of the questions that are contained in your email and they sort of maybe answer some of them, but not all of them? Do you have advice of like, is it warranting a follow-up, or is that a sign that your email is too long?
You know what, Ryan, that's a good question. I think there's classic it depends. So you know, you always want to follow up, even if it's simply to say, thank you for getting back to me on this. Don't underestimate a simple thank you. But it is worth following up and being more clear and concise. And I would go back and look at those emails. I mean, sometimes it's simply they don't have the information. If it's critical or time sensitive, pick up the phone and call them. I am a big phone talker. So is my manager. And it's funny because nowadays a lot of people don't, but there's some real efficiency in saying, hey, I just have to get through this one thing. You have the information. Let's knock it out. But Ryan, I would follow up, and I would follow up really succinctly. The other thing I do in some of those emails is format it, right? So, you know, hi, so-and-so, I need a response to these very two specific points by end of day Thursday. Can you please reply? If that's going to be a problem, please let me know. And just very specific deadlines and communications. Everything has to be very specific. The other option, and again, it depends on what kind of information you're seeking, is if it's to perhaps like one of my superiors or a project I'm working on, I might propose something. And that I didn't address in the remarks, but if you're trying to get something done or you need to move something forward, it can be really helpful to say, hey, I took a stab at this. I know you're going to have feedback. So again, you have to leave your ego at the door. but based on our conversation, I think this will get us started. What would you like me to change? And you're opening yourself up to say, I know a lot of this isn't right, or I know a lot of this isn't going to be what you want. But people do better reacting to things than they do starting from a blank canvas. So there's a couple of different ways to address it, but don't ever be afraid to follow up because you have to get what you need, and people are busy and they miss things. And if it is really long, then yeah, I would maybe try to shorten it next time.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Those are all
Of course.
good things to take into account.
Any other questions or comments? And if there is a specific example that you want to share with me, feel free to reach out or email me, and I'm happy to speak with anyone or take some time to take a look at it.
Yeah. Just a general comment. I liked your advice of avoiding I think and I catch myself on that too. So
Yeah.
good to have a confirmation that I should avoid that too.
Yeah. And listen, Ryan, I did it probably 100 times in this webinar, so nobody gets it perfect, but
Yeah, thank you very much.
yeah, thank you. Wow. I guess if there are no other questions at the moment, Haley, I'll turn it back over to you, but I hope you found this helpful and appreciate you guys spending the hour with us this afternoon.
Yes, thank you, Allie. That was wonderful. I know personally, I can take away a couple of those points that you shared with us and several things I could work on. So that was awesome. Thank you for being here. And thank you everyone for joining us today. This tech coach was recorded, so I'll be adding that to our NTC YouTube channel later today. If you want to reference back to it at any time or share it with someone, you're more than welcome to. And I hope you all can join us for our next tech coach. It'll be in the new year, so January 16th, 2025, which is crazy. And that one will be on resume building and social media, things like that. So we hope to see you all there, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.